Welcome to the House Judiciary Committee this Tuesday afternoon, April 21st. And this afternoon, we're going to be taking some testimony on a proposal for constitutional amendment. And I won't do much of an introduction because we only have Eric for about 15 minutes to do a walkthrough. If there are questions, we'll have Eric walk through it. If there are questions, we can have Eric come back in another time later this week or early next week. But since we have the public meeting this afternoon, I thought it was important to be introduced or reintroduced for the folks who were here last Miami and who thought that. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here as the chair said to do a walkthrough of a proposal of Amendment 4 to the Vermont Constitution, known frequently by the shorthand Prop 4. As the chair also mentioned, I have to be in House Corrections and Institutions in about 15 minutes, hence the need for my quick walkthrough at this time, but happy to come back anytime for follow-up questions or whatever we might not be able to get to today. And a quick moment about the history of this proposal, because under the process in Vermont for amending the Constitution, it has to be passed by the legislature. A proposal has to be passed by the legislature twice. And this proposal was passed in the 2023-24 biennium. And interestingly, during the first biennium, when a proposal is voted on, it has to be passed in the Senate by a 2/3 majority, not by a bare majority. It has to be a 2/3 majority, and then by a simple majority in the House. This time around, second time around, it's simple majority in the Senate, simple majority in the House. So interesting, and historically, or at least last time in the first biennium, proposal was passed by both bodies in the Senate, April 23rd, 2024. On a 29-0 vote with the 2/3 majority needed. And in the House, May 8th, 2024, simple majority needed, 140-4. This biennium, so this is now the second biennium that constitutionally required that it pass both. This was passed this year, March 11th, 2024, 29-0. Apparently I don't go through all that, but because that's constitutionally required, it's important to know the history of it, so that you know that it's in the correct posture now, which it is. So turning to the language, the proposal to amend the Constitution is to add, it's on page 2, starts on line 11. And there is a purpose section, which I'm passing over for now. Happy to look at that, but that actually will not appear in the Constitution. That language is set out for purposes of explaining what the purpose is, but that will not be in the constitutional amendment. That the language that would be in the Constitution, and I neglected to mention, after passing the two bodies, it has to be voted on by the citizens of Vermont and approved by a majority as well. So if this proposal passes the House the second time, which would be this biennium, then it would go on the ballot this coming November. And if approved by a majority vote, then it would be language that would be amended into the Constitution. And it would be amended as Article 23. That's on line 11, page 2. And you'll see the first line is on line 12. It's sort of a title of the proposed provision, that the people are guaranteed equal protection under the law. So that is what this is. It is an equal protection provision. And that's the proposal to add that. The United States Constitution has an equal protection provision. Many state constitutions have equal protection provisions as well. Vermont does not have one specifically. In the past, when people have made claims that are in the nature of equal protection, that I'm being treated differently because of my membership in this particular class of persons, this particular group, the Supreme Court has analyzed them under what's known as the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution. But has commented sometimes that is sort of a rough fit. It's not exactly an equal protection clause, but that's the methodology that the court has used for analyzing it. So the proposal here is to have an express equal protection clause. And what would it provide? Again, that's on page 2. Starts again on line 12 after the title that I just read. It says the state shall not deny equal protection under the law. So there's your equal protection lead-in language. On account of a person's, and then it's going to set out membership in certain classes or certain groups. And it says the state cannot deny equal protection on account of a person's race, ethnicity, sex, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or national origin. So that sets out what are often referred to as the protected classes. Now, the inclusion of a protected class here doesn't necessarily mean that through the purposes, or sorry, for the intents of future lawsuits that a person might bring, future cases that might occur in court, that the court might recognize some other group that isn't listed here. That's possible. There's a Connecticut Supreme Court case point to that held that the fact that a state constitution didn't identify a certain class does not mean that it can't be judicially recognized by a court decision. So this is the classes that are specified here are the ones that I just read. So a person might make out a claim on the basis of their membership in one of those classes that the state was denying them equal treatment, so that they were being treated differently on the basis of their membership in that class. And then the state would have to, in one way or another, and this is also something that's going to have to be developed in court cases, the state would have to propose a rationale. So the fact that a person could make out a claim that they were being treated differently doesn't mean that the state can't treat people differently sometimes. It just means that that the state would have to provide a rationale. And what type of legal analysis would be used in that, again, is something that's going to be developed in the courts. Historically speaking, it's of some, might be helpful to keep in mind, not necessarily a requirement that the Vermont Supreme Court would rule the exact same way, but for example, if someone made out a claim on the basis under the federal equal protection clause, I'm being treated differently because of my race, the federal courts use what's known as strict scrutiny. So the burden is then on the state to show, okay, yeah, we treated that person differently because of race, but the treatment was, narrowly tailored. We use the least restrictive means to serve a compelling state interest. So it's not that it's prohibited, but it does place the burden on the state to demonstrate by some standard that they had a reason for treating people differently. And could be successful, might not be successful, but it's not a blanket prohibition on it, the way those types of constitutional provisions have been interpreted. So lastly, or at least secondly, you'll see the second sentence. And this is actually based on some language that was passed recently in the New York Constitution. That nothing in this article shall be interpreted or applied to prevent the adoption or implementation of measures intended to provide equality of treatment and opportunity for members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination. So in other words, to think of an example, like that language could be used to say that an affirmative action program, for example, let's say a law enforcement agency had an affirmative action program. They want to try and include members of, might be race, ethnicity, gender, whatever it may be, to increase the number of those folks who are participants. On its face, you might look at that as a violation of the first sentence, right? That could be a treatment of somebody differently on the basis of one of those protected categories. So the second sentence is saying, the first sentence shall not be interpreted in that way to prohibit what might be called an affirmative action sort of program, if it's intended to provide equality of treatment for members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination. So that's the idea there. Again, similar language in the New York Constitutional Amendment that passed a couple of years back, I believe. So again, much of this will certainly be worked out in the courts. What standard of review to apply? If someone makes out a claim, will there be, how is it that one might demonstrate that even though they're not a member of one of these specifically mentioned classes, might they still get some kind of heightened protection in the context of bringing a legal claim? That would be something the courts would have to work out, and what the remedy might be. But if someone does make out a claim, is it the sort of situation where there might be the remedy might be limited to an injunction, for example, an order from the court that says, state, you can't treat people differently on the basis of this anymore? Or might there be monetary damages available? All that is for the court to work out. And the court does have decisions that have come down in the past that provide guidelines for when monetary damages are available for a constitutional violation, for example. There's longstanding Vermont Supreme Court doctrine on when that happens. So, but it's not expressly provided for here. So the courts will have to work that stuff out. Again, last thing, which I think, that's tonight, right? Public hearing. That's also statutorily required. I think it's by rule, actually, by House rule. In any event, requirement that in the House, but not the Senate, there has to be a public hearing on a proposed constitutional amendment. And that's really a quick walkthrough of the language and where some of it came from and where the proposal sits procedurally at the moment. Brings me to pretty much 1:15 exactly, but I can be a minute or two late if there's anything else that you want me to cover before I head out.
No, I think that's good. And like I say, we can have you back in later this week or early next week if there are any questions. So,
Yeah.
So I will get you down there so that Alice will trust me next time when it has some time when you're already booked with Alice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Not that way I don't walk in the door and the first thing that said is, I thought you were going to be here at 1:15.
Right. Exactly.
I thought you were gonna be here.
I know, that's why I looked at you when I said that.
First time you've been on time.
Just for you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we'll,
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thanks.
See you soon.
we'll hear from Karen Brown next. Thank you for being here, Karen. Before I do, I would actually, if we could have our guests introduce themselves. I didn't do that before. We only had for 15 minutes. But if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Blythe. I'm a professor at Vermont Law School. We're Ken's guests, and we have 4 members of our pre-law society. And gentlemen, if you just introduce yourselves and just very briefly let the members of the committee know why you're here.
My name's Jimmy. I'm a criminal justice and psych student, and I just want to see how things run around here.
Well, I'm Lenny Browning, I'm also a criminal justice student. I've had history with Boise State, so I just wanted to come back and just see how a different state ran.
Great. Excellent.
Harrison Salisbury, criminal justice. I was just really curious to see how the state of Vermont works internally.
Good afternoon, I'm Jared Stevens. I'm one of the co-presidents for Pre-Law Society. I'm mostly here for my own benefit, but also just to try to expand the club, give people opportunities, see the judicial system, all of that.
Great. Well, all of you, thank you for being here.
We appreciate, you're hosting us, and we especially appreciate Kenny's hosting us. Believe me, I do.
We appreciation for Kenny as well. So
I love that. Some of us have their condolences.
all right. Thank you, Carrie. If you could identify yourself for the record and proceed. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm Carrie Brown, the Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women. And I'm really happy to be here talking about this. I just can't tell you how pleased I am that this has worked its way as far through the process as it has. I want to just tell you a little bit about where we're coming from in this. So the Commission on Women is an independent state agency and working to advance rights and opportunities for women and girls in Vermont. We've been in existence since 1964. And our work is guided by a collection of policy statements that are adopted by the full commission and periodically reviewed and updated. The policy statement that guides my testimony today is one that was first adopted in 1995. And while some of the details may need to be updated, in its essence, it rings as true today as it did over 30 years ago. And I'll just read this to you. Whereas the Vermont Constitution states that all persons are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, amongst which are the enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. And whereas, although the Vermont Constitution guarantees equal rights for all persons, the reality is that this guarantee is neither recognized nor practiced by our society as a whole. And whereas in Vermont, as well as the rest of the nation, A great deal of work needs to occur in order to assure every citizen full civil rights as guaranteed under the Constitution. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Vermont Commission on Women supports legislation, policies, programs, and initiatives that facilitate full civil rights for all people, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ancestry, place of birth, age, physical disability, or mental disability. So we were pretty comprehensive in 1995. I'm kind of proud of the 1995 Commission. So the Commission on Women has been engaged in efforts to adopt an equal rights amendment at both the federal and the state levels throughout our 60-year history. But actually, in the big picture of history, we come to the fight relatively late. Proposal 4, as you have before you, is built on the foundation of hundreds of years of efforts on the part of generations of American women to establish equal legal rights. The first Equal Rights Amendment to the federal Constitution was proposed in 1923. The Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights took place in 1868. Abigail Adams urged her husband to remember the ladies in 1776. And just a side note, as I was researching this, I read part of his response, which was quite disrespectful and dismissive. And all of these were based on their ancestors' experiences. Then in 1986, a proposed amendment to the Vermont Constitution that addressed protection on the basis of sex failed at the ballot. Some of the arguments heard at the time included the fear of legal and social consequences such as reproductive rights and gay rights. In Vermont, we heard threats that passage of the ERA would lead to the interpretation of sex as inclusive of sexual orientation, leading to same-sex marriage and other protections of gay rights. Testimony at the time warned that we would be forced to hire gay people as teachers or allow women to serve as pastors. So in the decades since, Vermonters have recognized that these other protections that we were warned against are in fact protections that are just as necessary as those against sex discrimination. We have a broader understanding of equity as well as of the interconnectedness of forms of discrimination. Through our laws, we've recognized many of these rights, but as you know, laws can change. This is why Vermont amended our Constitution to include a right to personal reproductive liberty and to abolish slavery, even though there were also Vermont laws in existence to protect those rights. And this is why the Vermont Commission on Women supports Proposal 4, which would explicitly prohibit the state of Vermont from engaging in discrimination and unequal treatment on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, among other important protected classes. We believe it's long past time for Vermont to take this important step by providing additional constitutional protection for our residents. We are living in a time when we cannot take for granted that the legal and social gains made for equality based on sex or any other class will stand. We've never been able to take for granted that the courts will interpret the Constitution's current wording to protect people based on sex or any other class. While we cannot predict how the Vermont Supreme Court will decide to analyze cases under this proposed constitutional amendment, we do hope that it will trigger a heightened standard of review by the court in accessing government actions that treat people differently based on their membership in a named protected class. Today in public discourse, we hear echoes of the sentiments that defeated the Equal Rights Amendment in the past. At the time, Vermonters were told that constitutional protection would undermine traditional gender roles and destroy the very heart and structure of the family. They were told that equality in the Constitution would erode the natural roles and norms of men as providers and women as caregivers. I can attest on a personal note that growing up as a child in the 1970s with a mother who hosted women's lib meetings in our living room, when was the last time I heard the term women's lib? I never dreamed that my children would grow up to hear the Vice President of the United States tell women that working full time instead of having children is a path to misery. Or to say, we actually think God made male and female for a purpose, and we want you guys to thrive as young men and as young women, and we're going to help with our public policy to make it possible to do that. We support and appreciate the move to create a standalone Equal Rights Amendment in Article 23 of the Constitution, as well as the inclusion of the language, nothing in this article shall be interpreted or applied to prevent the adoption or implementation of measures intended to provide equality of treatment and opportunity for members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination. We believe that taken as a whole, this amendment sends a bold and timely message about our values and will offer Vermonters important protection from discriminatory state action.
Thank you very much. Any questions for? Go ahead, Zach.
Thank you, Carrie, for coming in. I think at the outset, I just want to say that I feel like your interpretation of the vice president's comments were taken a little bit out of context, because I think what the vice president was looking to convey, and I think something that we can all appreciate in the room, is that there's an affordability crisis in our country. There's an affordability crisis in our state. And what the vice president was, I think, looking to articulate is that it is okay to have different paths, right? Four-year colleges aren't for every student, just like going into the workplace isn't for every woman, and that there is value and dignity in raising a family within the home. So I think castigating that as something that's negative or anything other than him just trying to opine on a crisis of the consciousness of the country, I think that's just, we're going to diverge on our interpretations of those remarks. Specific to the proposal 4, I'm wondering if you have any concerns about the definitions or the lack of definitions about gender identity and gender expression.
I don't have any concerns. I think that those are pretty clearly defined in law and in precedent in Vermont already.
But I think they're unconstitutionally vague. And I think, with lack of definition, and again, we're probably on different sides. I think we probably are certainly on different sides of this issue. But my concern is that with those two terms not being described in the proposal itself, it could create a constitutional crisis for the very proposal and could undermine the entire thing. So I think there are concerns there. I'm also concerned about recent case law that we saw, which was Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard in 2023. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on affirmative action and really what, I guess, ongoing legal challenges to the underlying doctrine of this.
Yeah, well, so that's why we think it's really important that that sentence about nothing shall be interpreted or applied to prevent adoption, et cetera, members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination is really important, because that is something that, as centuries and centuries and centuries of discrimination against women and of denying women their rights has resulted in a situation today where things are not necessarily 100% equal because of all the discrimination that has happened in the past. And that is even much more true for members of other races, people who have disabilities, or and so in order to remedy some of that, in order to get people on equal footing, sometimes something along the lines of affirmative action is called for.
Would you advocate for reparations? Financial reparations?
Women? Yes. I think that's a great idea. No, that's probably not what you meant. What did you mean?
No. That's exactly it. But do you think, how do you think that would pull in the public? Do you think that's something that's really popular?
Reparations for women? I can't imagine a lot of people would be very supportive of that.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not the expert on this.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on reparations.
But you are an expert on women's rights.
Yes.
So I guess my last question is, do you have any evidence that women's rights are being diminished right now in the state of Vermont?
Yes.
Tell me more.
All right. Well, we look at women's economic situation in Vermont. Look at how much money women are making in Vermont and compare it to how much money men are making in Vermont. We see a difference. Called the wage gap. I'm sure you've heard of it. And there are many, many reasons why this exists. Historic discrimination has been part of that. It is less a part of it now, I would say, than it used to be. We no longer have ads in the paper that are specifically, that's saying that they're for women or for men. So that's an improvement. But we do still have things like, we had a case in court not too long ago where a woman was fired from her job and replaced by a man with much less experience who made a lot more money than she had been making. And the rationale that the employer gave was that the man had a family to support, so he needed to be paid more money. That is discrimination. And the courts found so when she brought a lawsuit against the employer.
Where was this case brought?
In Burlington.
Thank you. I mean, the only thing that I would add is, my professional work experience is in financial services in New York City. So I mean, it's very different. I was born and raised in Vermont. And obviously, I'm back here now serving in the legislature. But the Vermont economy is very different than that we might find in other states. And what I mean by that is the services economy is robust, especially when you talk about financial services and tech and the industry that you might find in New York City versus the industry that you might find in Vermont. So I think, while I don't have any of the data to substantiate or refute what you're saying about in terms of the wage gap that exists. I think historically we have seen a wage gap between the two genders. But I would also say that in terms of the economy in the state of Vermont and the jobs that are being done by men and the jobs that are being done by women, there probably is a disparity in between those jobs. It's not me justifying anything, but I think there is a reality that the jobs are probably vastly different than you have a man and a woman working on an investment banking desk in New York. So the jobs are probably very different, when I think of like working the land versus working behind the desk on a computer.
You are correct that we have a high reliance on service jobs.
Mhm.
And you are correct that occupational segregation is a factor in the wage gap. However, Vermont's wage gap is much less than almost every other state's. And so in spite of the fact that we may have a lot of women working in service jobs and childcare and things like that pay less, we still have a smaller wage gap. And that is because we have done a lot of work to try to change that. The legislature has passed many laws, equal pay protection law. We have a law against basing salaries on past salary history. We have people have the right to request flexible working arrangements. We have lots of programs that private organizations have put in place, as well as the Vermont Commission on Women and our partners that work directly with employers on education and on providing tools, such as we have something called the LEAP, which stands for, now I can't remember, but it's a toolkit that small businesses can use to audit themselves and to find out, are they paying equally? Are they not? And then, but it looks at, it's more broad than just simply lining up the numbers against each other. It's also looking at promotional practices. It's looking at, how they're hiring, where they're advertising. So all these things can really make a big difference. So Vermont gets a ton of credit for doing a lot to offset the kind of inequalities that we see in the workplace.
Right. And I think that's kind of my point, is that should be celebrated, because I don't.
It is
when I think of
yeah.
When I think of Vermont and the list of, quote unquote offenders of, having a more vast wage gap, it seems like the work that we've done should be celebrated, which is why I'm curious why
I agree.
we need this in the first place.
Because those are all laws.
Right. They're already laws.
Yeah, where they're already laws, and laws are not permanent protections necessarily. They can
Right, but I
change.
think under the guise of, the federal government coming for us, I just don't think that strengthens the argument. To me, that weakens it.
Oh, I think that we need this protection in Vermont
Right, but
Not
that
just
some could take
federal.
that testimony as hyperbole.
that are,
The fear sensationalization of the federal government coming for us, and that's something
I
that we,
didn't say anything about the
that's
federal
something-
government coming for us.
but coming for our, our rights and protect the need for additional protections here. If it's already codified in law and it's working, right? Like your own testimony is that this is working. The wage gap is the slimmest it's probably ever been in the state of Vermont. That to me sounds like progress, which means that we don't really need additional language brought forward.
Just to clarify, I think that we do need this in our Vermont Constitution in order to protect the Vermont laws that we already have. It's not about what the federal government might or might not do. It's about what might happen in the future. A future Vermont legislature could make changes to those laws, and we want to protect people's rights in the event that might happen.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here. You kind of got to my question, which is just this would be future protection as well for equal rights, and that would be if any law were to be repealed or changed that could potentially impact someone's rights, that this would be an additional protection, state constitutional protection that would protect Vermonter in the future. Correct?
Yes, that's the idea. Yeah.
And do you think that's important?
I think that's extremely important because we cannot predict what will happen. I mean, one of the strengths of the legislature is that you all can respond to what's happening in the world, and you can make laws and change laws, and that's good. And there needs to be something underlying it, which is why we have a constitution at all.
And do you think that this type of protection is one of those protections that's needs to be one of those underlying?
I do. Yes. Yes, I do. Because I don't think that, I mean, we know from historically that those rights are not necessarily always guaranteed. So I think that's why we need to spell it out.
Thank you.
Tom?
How do you feel about males competing in women's sports?
Well, I mean, I think if you really want my honest answer as a parent of kids and who play sports, I would much rather see a world where sports were not necessarily segregated by gender, but by ability. So I know we don't live in that world, but I would be a lot happier about that. I know that there are women who could pitch a baseball fast enough to be able to be a pitcher in the MLB. And it would be great if there were no segregation that way.
Is it pitch in baseball fast enough to pitch in the MLB?
I'm sure of it. I could be wrong, but I believe it.
All right.
I guess
Appreciate it.
I have one more. How would you define a woman?
I'm not going to answer that question. Sorry.
Why?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question.
It seems to me that the head of the Vermont Women's Alliance should be able to answer that.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay, I think the silence is deafening. I would just say that.
Thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate you being here, and we'll go to Arnold Thomas next, because I see that Mark Hughes is here quite yet. So joining us by Zoom, thank you for being here, Reverend Thomas. I appreciate it.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can. Just identify yourself for the record and proceed. Thank you for being here.
Yes, my name is Reverend Arnold Thomas. I am the former pastor of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Jericho, Vermont. I am also the former conference minister, which is the executive minister of the United Church of Christ, commonly understood as congregational churches in the state of Vermont. I actually was part of the effort to move the conference of congregational churches in the state toward becoming open and affirming, that is, affirming and inclusive of employing as well as affirming the membership of gay and lesbian members within the church. So that happened back in 2002, which gives you an indication of how long I've been here in Vermont. Actually, I came to Vermont in 1998 and have been here since then. So I'm glad to be invited, and I'm also representing, to some extent, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, where I serve on the board. So, should I continue?
Please do, yes.
So I offer my support of Proposition 4 with a note of skepticism. The universal ethic that unites both secular and sacred ideals is the golden rule, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Fortunately, the others we do unto are preferably those who look and act like us. Anyone else is considered less or entirely undeserving of equal status, dignity, and treatment. We Vermonters need to remind ourselves that while we were both the first state in the nation and first region in the Americas to outlaw slavery, what we endorsed theoretically was not what we practice. White Vermonters, like white Americans in general at the time, were inculcated and conditioned to regard those unlike themselves as inferior and often neglected the enslavement of others within their state. So my note of skepticism is one that questions the sincerity of this proposition, given our conditioning to the culture of hierarchy, division, and favoritism. How committed are we in creating a cultural infrastructure in which our teachers, healthcare providers, law enforcement officials, politicians, along with the rest of us, are ready to devote our lives and resources to assuring the rights of others regardless of their race, ethnicity, sex, religion, physical ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or national origin. When ICE roams among us, our neighborhoods, searching for our neighbors, when our residents are unable to afford decent housing, when children marginalized in one form or another fail to see themselves reflected in their teachers and curricula, when people of color live in constant caution and fear for their safety in an overwhelmingly white state, when life-saving medical care remains out of reach for many, how committed are we to devoting our lives and resources to changing these ingrained conditions of our culture? This proposition offers us an objective we are presently unprepared to achieve and reeks of the skepticism Peter Townsend of The Who declared, "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss." My endorsement of Proposition 4 is an equally urgent proposition that we prepare ourselves for the challenge of living up to and into this proposition. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much for being here. Are there questions for Reverend Thomas?
I have one.
Yeah, it's
Reverend, thanks for your testimony. I'm curious, what denomination is your parish?
My parish, my denomination is United Church of Christ, and the United Church of Christ more commonly is understood as congregational churches in this state. In Montpelier, that would be Bethany United Church of Christ. But I have also served in an ecumenical capacity. My last parish, by the way, was Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, where I served as the ecumenical pastor of that church for 7 years before retiring.
Okay. So I just was curious if it doesn't really fall within the scope of traditional Catholic social thought.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. I just think it's just worth pointing that out. Not that I think your values are very much aligned with those of the Catholic Church, but maybe in practice is a little bit different. One of the things that you mentioned is that you have Vermonters that are fearing for their safety. I was wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about that.
When you say Vermont, what?
You said
could you run
something that we have Vermonters fearing for their safety.
Yes.
Tell me more about those Vermonters.
Yes, I was referring specifically to Vermonters of color, who in an overwhelmingly white state are cautious and afraid for their safety. We should applaud the fact that Vermont was one of the first state, if not the first state, to implement a program for fair and impartial policing.
Right.
But that remains a part-time program for the training of state police officers, as well as and I think there's also a counterpart in the police academy for the training of for people training for state to be state police officers. That applies mostly to the state level, not to the local level. There are no such counterparts on the local level. And this is where persons of color in Vermont are most affected. Although there have also been discrepancies and cases in which the state police has also been challenged because of their unfair approach to drivers, to people who have been driving on Vermont roads who are of color, be they black or people of different ethnicity.
Right.
So
I think,
that's all record. That's all on the record.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I would say that, one of the frequent flyers in this committee is the Commissioner of Public Safety, Jennifer Morrison. And then I think if you were to ask the commissioner about the Fair and Impartial Policing Act, which she had a hand in crafting, it is not a part-time policy. I think she takes it very seriously. I think everyone in Vermont State Police and law enforcement takes their duties very seriously to all Vermonters. And as we heard from the last witness and what you just pointed out with the landmark legislation that was the Fair and Impartial Policing Act, we live in one of the most progressive, welcoming states, I think, probably in the country, which again is something that should be celebrated. The other point that I just want to mention, sorry, let me just get this question out, and then I promise you'll have time. You had mentioned a crisis in healthcare, and I wonder if it's a lack of access for people of color to healthcare in the state of Vermont, or if it's an affordability crisis, and whether you're white, brown, black, or some other color, people just can't afford healthcare regardless of the color of their skin.
Well, I think that is correct, and I think it is especially pertinent among people of color. But I think it applies to everyone that the affordability of healthcare has become so out of reach that that when we look at the issue of equity, it is not only that of racial, ethnic, gender equity that we're pursuing. There's also one that provides more affordability and accessibility to all other aspects that affirm the dignity of a person's presence and status in the state. And that includes education, it includes healthcare, it includes housing and other matters as well. Yes, I agree.
On that, we absolutely agree. Thank you.
Coach and then Tom. Coach, unmute yourself. You're not unmuted yet. Okay, go ahead, Coach.
Hello. I just wanted to take a moment and really welcome all of our guests today, especially Reverend Thomas, who's been known, for his work on breaking down those barriers across the state. And I just wanted to say thank you before I lost that opportunity. Thanks again.
All right, thanks, Coach. Tom.
Thank you, Reverend. I think you almost covered my question, having to do with fair and impartial policing. And I'm just trying to clarify if you believe that the FIP wasn't fully observed by all law enforcement in the state of Vermont?
I think there are cases in which state police officers have been brought to court, and issues have been considered where they have not been fair and impartial in their dealing with people of color on the road. And again, I think that's a matter of record. But I think in light of that record, we need to pursue a more serious commitment to the training of both state police officers as well as local police officers in trying to implement a more serious and dedicated fair and impartial policing policy. I have no question that the present commissioner or public safety, Jennifer Morrison, as well as previous commissioners, have tried their best to make sure that this procedure has been fairly implemented. But we're dealing with individuals who do not always agree and who do not always practice what they believe. And so we need to be very careful. We need to be very dedicated and concerted in this program of fair and impartial policing. The to apply to more than just the state. And I know the previous director of the fair and impartial policing effort was hired part-time, even though he worked full-time. And it is still presently less hours than are needed for the full implementation and the expanded approach that procedure and that program needs to cover all law enforcement officials, not just within the state level, but also the local level. So I think there's much road that needs to be traveled for us to get to where we wish to be on both the state and local level in the area of fair and impartial policing.
Okay.
We've come a long ways, but we have a much longer way to go.
Right, I understand. I'm just, I'm a law enforcement officer, not at the state level, local level, and I've been very much involved in the training at the Vermont Police Academy. And the requirements for all officers in the state of Vermont are exactly the same. So I'm wondering if you're just speaking of having a more robust fair and impartial policing program.
Can I ask a question, Martin?
Yeah, 1 second.
Or no, I'm just kind of wondering how far outside of this constitutional proposition are we going with questioning?
As far as I just went, I guess. That's what I'm trying to decide. I don't know if he understands what it is. And it was built to take care of people that are included.
No, and I get that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, okay.
Isaac,
I
thank
think he
you.
needs to be able to ask the question.
Go ahead.
I think it's a fair question, and I also feel that people of color do not feel as if the law enforcement officials on either the state or the local level are trained and sensitized enough to be impartial in their administration of their offices, of their respective office. And I think such training needs to be part and parcel of our understanding of what it means to be just and fair and equitable in our treatment of citizens within the state.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any other questions for thank you very much again for being here. I really appreciate being able to be here in such short notice as well. So we'll go to Renee McGinnis because I don't see.
He's just gotten the waiting room. Yeah, just gotten it.
All right, but we'll start with Renee, and Renee, you come first, and then we'll have Mark after Renee. Identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Renee McGinnis, Vermont Family Alliance Policy Analyst. So Vermont Family Alliance is a parental rights and minor protections advocacy group. Nate uploaded my testimony from Senate Judiciary, which is not exactly right. I have hard copies if anybody wants a hard copy to follow. I hope I have enough. Yeah, I don't know if I have enough because.
We can make sure that gets posted as well.
It's already posted.
Oh, it's the
Yeah,
same
it should
one
be.
posted?
What else?
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you keep it. That was
You should get in front of
Is it correct online or no?
Another one?
Yeah,
Have one.
I can take one more right here.
Yeah, I'll take it.
So Proposition 4, Vermont Family Alliance, we acknowledge there have been many violations of equal rights in the past, and we're not necessarily opposed to an equal rights amendment with broader language, as was recommended by Peter Teachout, constitutional law professor, and only if it is equally applied. Our main concern after analyzing Prop 4, testimony by constitutional law professor Peter Teachout, and listening to discussions on Prop 4 in both the Senate and House Judiciary Committees in 2024 and 2026, is that the legislature will pass laws that discriminate against biological women, Christians, and traditional families by providing expanded protections to the finite list of state-sanctioned historically marginalized populations under Section 1, Purpose B, and specifically under gender identity and gender expression in the proposed amendment. Vermont Family Alliance, we are opposed to the passage of Prop 4 by the General Assembly to be put before the voters in November 26 for the following reasons. Number one, Proposition 4 presents a finite list of groups that would be protected by laws passed under Prop 4 at the exclusion of other groups. Peter Teachout pointed out that the finite list of protected classes presents interpretive challenges for the courts in his testimony to Senate Judiciary Committee on January 30th, 2024. He recommended broader language per the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as follows. And so in the upload, you'll have a link to Peter Teachout's testimony. I'm not going to spend time reading everything that he included in his language in the amendment. So I'm going to go to B. The Senate Judiciary Committee did not take up Teachout's suggestion for broader language and passed Proposition 4 out of committee with a finite list of groups. C. Teachout also stated in his testimony to House Judiciary Committee on May 1st, 2024 that, quote, once you start listing protected classes, you raise the question of why the particular types of discrimination are listed and not others. The law has a technical term for this reflected in the Latin maxim, expressio unius est exclusio alterius, which means that if you include certain classes in a closed list, you mean to exclude others. Because of the way Prop 4 is currently framed, practitioners and courts will consequently be faced with difficult questions. Are members of the classes specifically listed in the amendment in Prop 4 the only ones entitled to judicial protection against discrimination? If not, are they entitled to special protections that members of other classes are not entitled to? If neither of those, then what is gained by listing them? End quote. Teachout suggested that, if possible, House Judiciary Committee return Prop 4 to the Senate to request a quick fix by inserting language on grounds such as to expand protections to all groups of people. He wrote, quote, it is important to remember we are considering the adoption of a constitutional amendment, a fundamental statement of governance that is supposed to guide us over the long term, so that while we are doing it, it's important to try to get it right. End quote. The House Judiciary Committee passed Prop 4 out of the committee, knowing that the language would cause interpretive challenges in the courts because passing Prop 4 within the 2024 timeline was a higher priority than getting the language right. Legislation passed under Prop 4 that intentionally or consequentially prioritizes the rights and protections of transgender women over biological women will face court challenges. Teachout stated in his January 30th, 2024 testimony to Senate Judiciary that, quote, the federal standard establishes the floor below which states cannot go, but it does not prevent states from providing greater protections. The limit is when the state law conflicts with federal constitutional law. That is the limitation that Vermont would face if it were to attempt to invoke a newly added equal protection clause as support for adopting affirmative action programs, giving preferences to members of historically disadvantaged groups. In a recent case involving challenges to affirmative action admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that making race a factor in deciding who gets beneficial treatment, whatever the motivation, and whether it serves to advantage or disadvantage a racial minority, constitutes a form of racial discrimination prohibited by the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. So if the state were to be amended to, so if the state constitution were to be amended to include an Equal Protection Clause, that clause could not be invoked by the state as support for adoption of affirmative action programs that take this form. Since federal law is supreme, all such programs would be vulnerable to challenge under the federal Equal Protection Clause on grounds they constitute impermissible discrimination on the basis of race. Vermont Family Alliance further asserts that any laws that elevate the rights of biological males that identify as female under gender identity and gender expression under Prop 4 will be challenged as in violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. 3, some legislators have already demonstrated they have a mindset to discriminate against some groups under Proposition 4. The original 2019 language proposed amendment contained the word religion. It was removed in 2023 and then added back in 2024, which suggests the likelihood that legislators will not exercise equal protections in laws introduced and passed under Prop 4, but will actively attempt to discriminate against some groups by expanding protections for the finite list of groups at the expense of others. 4, any laws passed under Prop 4 that expand protections for gender identity and gender expression over biological sex will be challenged as unconstitutional. Any Vermont laws passed under Prop 4 that bump up against the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and recent SCOTUS decisions, such as Students for Fair Admissions versus the President and Fellows of Harvard, will face a legal challenge. Mid-Vermont Christian versus Saunders, given the preliminary injunction to allow Mid-Vermont Christian back into the Vermont Principals Association, we anticipate a decision in favor of Mid-Vermont Christian regarding their participation in both interscholastic sports and town tuitioning. The SCOTUS decision coming in early summer 2026 on whether to uphold state bans on transgender males in girls' sports under Title IX will also serve as precedent. We anticipate a decision in favor of upholding state bans and that Vermont individuals and schools will sue Vermont for allowing biological males that identify as females to play in girls' sports and have access to girls' private spaces. 5, legislators have failed to disseminate information to the public on Prop 4. There were fewer in attendance at the May 1st, 2024 public hearing than there were members on the House Judiciary Committee that hosted the public hearing, and only 6 people, none of whom were from the general public, testified. 6, quite simply, Prop 4 will give the Vermont legislature neither the constitutional upper hand nor the moral upper hand that it is seeking. The Vermont legislature simply should not pass laws that expand protections for a finite list of Vermonters while violating the rights of other groups due to the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment, and recent SCOTUS decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Renee? Barbara Van Zek.
Renee, thank you. Good to see you again. So I'm a little confused about why you think in particular biological women and Christians will suffer if this passes, given that religion is listed and sex is listed.
Well, I think we're seeing the ongoing case now, right? So I think that's a good example with Mid-Vermont Christian School. I think we're seeing that now where the girls have actually been discriminated against. The girls' basketball team is being discriminated, and that lawsuit is ongoing right now.
And just they're being discriminated against because it seems like, yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, in general, it's I'm hearing sort of a scarcity and kind of like who gets the scarcity, and I'm just wondering if that's kind of how you're viewing it, because in general, it seems like if everybody does well, we all do better. So I
guess I don't understand your question. What do you mean by?
Well, like when you were saying, if the people on the list are included, the other people aren't included. And you've talked about Harvard, which I know this wouldn't really, I guess Vermont schools would fall under this if they're state funded, but sort of assuming that there are winners and losers, like why isn't this?
I guess, because I think we're already seeing examples of winners and losers right now currently with what's going on in Vermont. So girls are being discriminated against in their own sports. There should be girls' sports and boys' sports because we are biologically built differently. We do not have the same strengths and capacities.
So I'm unclear. It sounds like a lot of things would go to court that would necessarily her that. But what I'm worried about is I have so many constituents and I've had students who have been discriminated against because of their race, because of their religion. Like they've been hurt in lots of different ways right now. And it seems like there are some really important safety mechanisms and opportunities that could open up by Vermont guaranteeing equal protection under the law.
Sure. So again, yeah, and my understanding is that Vermont has pretty robust anti-discrimination laws. And again, so we're not necessarily opposed to a constitutional amendment. We want to see broader language because your own expert witness on constitutional law recommended broader language twice to both Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary, which would have lessened any kind of court interpretive challenges and would have applied equally to everyone. Yeah, it needs to apply equally to everyone. Again, I would reiterate that what Peter Teachout said is when you have a finite list of groups, legally what that means is that you intend to exclude other groups. So,
and sex and religion are on here. And I would hope that the people you're worried about would be covered because you can discriminate against by their sex or their religion. And I'm very confused about the biological mother part. Like, why would we discriminate what evidence you have about that? Right now, I know that, for example, the maternal outcomes for people of color in our country are way lower, the number of deaths that happen. So if anything, those are biological mothers that end up having really bad outcomes for themselves and their kids. So I don't see biological moms getting.
I didn't write biological.
You had mentioned biological mothers.
Males. I may have said males.
I said mothers.
Yeah, no males. Yeah. Sorry if I misspoke. Yeah, not true.
Yes.
Renee, thanks for being here.
Sure.
And I really want to thank you too for your very thoughtful and pragmatic approach to this, and also for your advocacy, because I think your voice is one that we don't often hear enough of in this room and in this building. So I just want to start by saying thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I also just want to say, as far as non-biological, transgender men and transgender women playing in biological male and women's sports, there's also a huge safety consideration there. And I think one of the stories that we heard nationwide is in 2022, Peyton McNabb, who's a biological woman playing volleyball, was hurt so severely that she not only dropped out of the sport entirely, but was treated for a concussion after being struck by a transgender man playing in women's volleyball in California. So I just want to say it's beyond even just the cultural aspects of all of this, and surely what's right and wrong. There's also a safety component to all of this, and we don't want to see Vermont's girls getting hurt in their sports. And I think you and I are very much aligned on that point. One of the questions I have, and again, going back to what the prior representative was just talking about with sex and religion, those aren't really the points that, at least that I'm really contesting. The points, and I see that you and I have similar concerns in your testimony as well, is it's around gender identity and gender expression. So I'm wondering if you can talk, even double click a little bit further on why it's so important that we get that those terms are clearly defined because of the unconstitutionality concerns that we probably share.
I'm not so sure with my understanding that those terms could be defined because the books that I see even being read to kindergartners say that gender is fluid and that you can change your mind all the time. So I don't know that it's possible that those could be nailed down enough.
And I think
constitutionally, yeah.
Thank you. And I think that presents a really important point, is that if two terms that cannot be clearly defined are being included in the constitutional amendment to the state of Vermont, they probably shouldn't be included in the first place.
So thank you again for coming today.
Thank you.
Ian?
Thanks for your testimony. I think my only question was number 5 on yours, the disseminating information regarding the public hearings. I don't really know what the legislature does as far as how we push that information out. I've had the pleasure of getting to do a number of public hearings with this committee, and some of them are really well attended. Some of them aren't as well attended. So do you have any suggestions or concerns about like how this particular these public hearings are particularly sort of disseminated, or
I do, actually.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to amend the House and Senate rules to include a requirement that these public hearings need to be published into papers, news outlets that are widely circulated across the state. I think if you go to, I don't have it off the top of my head. I know there's a requirement, different requirements depending on which biennium the constitutional amendment is in. I think the Secretary of State has to publish into broadly circulated papers across the state, like 90 days or something like that before this comes up to vote, or 90 days after the adjournment of the session. I don't remember exactly, but I think it would be helpful if that were in the rules. That either who has possession of it now, the House or Senate, Judiciary needs to make sure that this is published a couple of times in major news outlets for people to see that. And then also, I know personally that, legislative newsletters are helpful. And I haven't received too many of those personally from my representatives or senators about what Proposition 4 is all about. Another major concern is that I think people need access to the entire intent, the purpose section of this constitutional amendment, because all they're going to see is the language that they're voting on. I don't think they understand what sentence 3 means. And Senator Hashim stated on the Senate floor before they voted this proposal out of the Senate floor, he stated that third sentence specifically relates to reparations. And so people need to know that laws passed under Proposition 4 are going to cost us money, probably. And we're in a state that already has a bloated budget, in a state where people are already financially suffering. So I think people need to be made aware of the positives and the negative implications of this constitutional amendment. And they really don't have access to this. Not too many people get to listen in on all the hearings, but they certainly don't get to read the purpose section of the bill. All they see is the constitutional amendment on the ballot to be voting for. So if there's anything that could be added to the rules to make sure that everyone has access to the purpose and intent of constitutional amendments, I think that would be helpful. We're fundamentally changing our constitution. This isn't just a law, it's a big deal. Fundamentally changing how we, how the state government functions. And that's a big deal. It's not to be taken lightly. So. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can always work to try to make sure we're getting as many people's voices covered.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Renee, for being here.
Thank
you. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you.
So before we go to Mark Hughes, which we'll do in a moment, I'll just point out that 1 VSA section 144 does have a definition of gender identity. So it is defined in statute.
Gender expression.
Gender expression is not as far. So Mark Hughes, over to you. If you could unmute yourself and join us and identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Thanks for being available today, Mark.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and good afternoon to the committee. It's been a while since I've been here, and I know that there's a number of new faces. So just want to greet the committee and also thank you for the opportunity. My name is Reverend Mark Hughes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. And I'm pleased to come and offer you testimony this afternoon on the on PR4, the Equal Protection Amendment, what we refer to as the Equal Protection Amendment of the Constitution. So I appear before you in strong support of Proposal 4, the Equal Protection Amendment to the Vermont Constitution. I've worked many years with communities and state partners addressing civil rights and systemic racism and democratic integrity. So I want to begin by stating something plainly for the record, and that is that the warning that brought us here was correct. What we anticipated constitutionally and legally and morally has now materialized, and I want to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. I've got a testimony that will go on for a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes or something like that. I invite the committee to interrupt me at any time. I would prefer to get to the end of the testimony, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. But I'm here at the request of the chair, so whatever you're choosing. I want to acknowledge the gravity of the moment, and also this committee. I want to state the fact that this committee is not just simply considering a proposal. You're operating at the intersection of a constitutional amendment, federal civil rights collapse, and a long-term judicial stewardship of the state of Vermont. Now, history is going to look back at this moment, and it's not going to be about what we debated. It's going to be about what was secured at this time. So what has brought us here? How did we get here? Well, several years ago, we advanced this amendment because we were following two things. First, Vermont's own trajectory toward equity and justice. And second, the direction of the federal constitutional law. So Vermont has made it pretty clear through action that equity actually matters. I'm going to use that word, equity. But if you care to replace it with the word justice, or instead use the word justice, that's fine too. The trajectory that I want to tell you about is the one that starts with Act 54, which was accomplished in 2017. It was the Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Systems Advisory Panel. And to be clear, that was where the fair and impartial policing policy first was elevated to the place where it is today. And I too sat in those rooms in the creation of the fair and impartial policing policy with Jen Morrison, as well as the migrant justice folks as well. That policy, what it created in Title 20, 23, 58, and 23, 66 is not just a fair and impartial policing policy, but also the race traffic stop data. And you will probably see, I've seen an embargoed copy, but you will see a copy of that report drop again yet this week, and you will not be surprised by what you see in that report. Also, the training standards were brought out in that. Something incredibly important happened with this Act 54 that I would ask the committee to be mindful of. In addition to the RDAP, which we refer to as the Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel, whom I know you've probably heard quite a bit from, was also created the Attorney General's and the Human Rights Commission's task force on racial disparities in all systems of state government. Racial disparities in all systems of state government, written by then Karen, who was the HRC director, and David Scher, who's now the deputy at Treasury. That report is on record. It was, what do we do about racial disparities in all systems of state government? That was before we developed the language of systemic racism, which was codified the following year in the creation of the Office of Racial Equity, or the Director of Racial Equity, more importantly, which was Act 9 in special session of 2018. what would follow is the governor, having vetoed the first iteration of this, released Executive Order 0418, which also creates an Office of Racial Equity in the executive branch. And it still remains on the books today, despite the fact that the governor did indeed approve the second iteration, because we did give him authority to terminate this person. This executive order remains on the books, Executive Order 0418. Proposal 2, abolishing slavery. Despite Peter Teachout's disagreement that it was a good thing to do, we did remove the exception clauses to slavery from the Constitution of the state of Vermont. Abolishing slavery. That was Proposal 2. Act 33, Health Equity Advisory Commission, was created in 2021. That went on to create the Office of Racial Equity. And Resolution 113 is racism is a public health emergency, where it was a joint legislative resolution that remains unrescinded, that commits the legislature to doing the work of eradicating systemic racism. That's R113 2021. Act 182, the Racial Justice Data and Accountability, I beg your pardon, the Land Access Opportunity Board, which is currently in existence. All of these apparatuses, I would note that in 2022, 88% of the state of Vermont, of Vermonters, this goes towards the absence of folks at public hearings, because we must never forget that to amend the Constitution, there must be a referendum, a state referendum. 88% of Vermonters voted to abolish slavery in 2022. This was not symbolic. It's a reflection of a shared understanding that truth is the foundation of justice. Now, we warned something specific. What we warned is that the statutory progress without constitutional grounding would not survive a hostile turn in federal doctrine. That warning was not validated. That warning is now validated. We're no longer talking about erosion. We are witnessing systemic dismantling of civil rights at the national level. Over the past year, the federal government has neutralized the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division. It has weakened the EEOC and the OFCCP. It's dismantled housing enforcement. It's crippled Title VI enforcement, closed environmental justice offices, abandoned remedies for documented discrimination, and chilled civil rights policy nationwide. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of where we are with the civil rights apparatus at the federal level. At the same time, the Supreme Court has ended affirmative action, weakened voting rights enforcement, narrowed precedent, and reframed equal protection as abstract neutrality. Let me be clear. This is one of the most hostile federal civil rights environments since the 19th century. But we've seen this before. After Reconstruction, the constitutional amendments existed. Enforcement collapsed. Courts narrowed doctrines, and states were left exposed. And equality became symbolic rather than real. History teaches us that when equal protection collapses, democracy collapses with it. Modern discrimination does not operate the way that law assumes. It does not always declare intent. It operates through systems, housing, employment, education, policy, algorithms, systems that appear neutral but produce unequal outcomes. Under current doctrine, intent is required, impact is discounted, and structural harm is often invisible. When courts refuse to see impact, they legitimize inequality. That's how equal protection becomes hollow. Now we come to Vermont. Despite all of this, Vermont has no equal protection clause in its constitution. Article 7 is not an equal protection clause. It addresses special privilege, not classification based upon discrimination. Using it for this purpose is using the wrong tool. In today's environment, that absence is not academic. It's dangerous. When federal prosecution weakens, when states become the last line of defense, the states become the last line of defense. And at this moment, three things matter: judicial independence, constitutional clarity, and moral courage. That is the role before you. Proposal 4 provides Vermont with a constitutional foundation for equal protection, a foundation. It provides us with independence from federal doctrinal collapse, the ability to evaluate both purpose and effect, and capacity to address systemic and algorithmic harm, and it provides support for a durable civil rights policy, for any durable civil rights policy. Let me be clear about what it does not do. It doesn't mandate outcomes. It doesn't override federal law, and it doesn't eliminate judicial review. It provides clarity, and it provides authority. So courts interpret constitutions through text and intent. Courts, that's who interpret constitutions, courts. And Vermont has already declared repeatedly that eradicating systemic racism is a compelling state interest. So I want to state clearly for the constitutional record here, Proposal 4 is intended to give constitutional effect to Vermont's determination that eradicating systemic racism is a compelling state interest, and to ensure that state action may be evaluated based on both purpose and effect. Now, I want to speak directly to the committee. You're not just reviewing a proposal. You're building a constitutional record. You're shaping judicial interpretation. And you're determining whether Vermont acts in time. And time matters. The legislative window is limited. Procedural requirements are real. And delay is not neutral. Delay determines outcomes. You're going to hate this, but I'm going to frame this morally, but I'm a preacher and I think I can get away with this just for a minute. As a Christian minister, I got to say this. Our traditions teach us to defend the folks who are oppressed. Our traditions teach us to care for the most vulnerable. Our traditions teach us to stand in the gap. And they also teach us that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It's complicity. So let's clarify a couple misconceptions before we get to closing. Let's be clear. Equal protection is not special treatment. It's a condition under which the law is legitimate. It's the foundation of democracy. It's the foundation of democracy. And as we see the legacy of slavery, systemic racism, and we understand it, the more clearly we understand it, the more clearly we understand why civil rights were necessary to make this nation a democracy. And as a retired Army warrant officer, I believe in that. After Reconstruction, this country, it failed to act, and it paid a terrible price. Vermont now has an opportunity to choose differently. In closing, this is not routine. It's not abstract. It's not distant. This is a constitutional moment. And the question is simple. Will Vermont make equal protection explicit? Will it make equal protection durable? And will Vermont make equal protection real? So I urge the committee, act on this proposal 4. I'm sure you will receive ample testimony this evening. Build a clear, disciplined record for this action, and voted out of this committee in the affirmative. And ensure that equal protection in Vermont is not just symbolic, not contingent, and not left to chance. Stand up, speak out, hold up the shield. Thank you for your careful attention, and I'm prepared to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mark. Zach?
Thanks, Mark. You raised a lot of interesting points. I think I want to first start with maybe a word of caution on maybe the hyperbole about a very emotive landscape that we're currently living in, because I think just like you have a lived experience, I have a lived experience, and so does half the country who did vote for the administration in exactly what we're seeing today. So you might not agree with it, but I think we should all respect it. We should all certainly root for the federal administration's success because they are the governing body in our country. A couple of things. First, you used a new term that I've never heard before in my life, and I like to think of myself as pretty well read, but algorithmic harm. And I'm wondering if you can tell the committee what exactly algorithmic harm is.
No, I can't tell the committee exactly what algorithmic harm is, and I do appreciate your analysis and also your assessment of the what sounded almost like an admonishment. But I
haven't gotten to the admonishment part.
I'd like to just push back a little bit on that, and then I will tell you what I believe algorithmic is, and just state that I think again it kind of goes to the heart of the point that was made is there's intent and then there's harm, and I think the folks who are most harmed are usually most qualified to be able to speak to it. But I do appreciate your analysis. Let's talk about algorithmic. I think where we discovered that was not when we initiated this work, but it was more along the lines of when we were going through the process and we were seeing, we were beginning to see some of the outcomes of efforts that were being made to redress some of the harm that was being done. Because what we know is it's not by accident that disparities do in fact exist. This is not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, and empirically evident that they exist across all systems of social determinants of health, housing, education, employment, racially disparate and adverse outcomes. So we know that. And the question kept coming back, how could that be? Is this, here's a charged one, critical race theory? And I think that the more we took a look at it and the more we tried, and I think Justice Gorsuch summed it up best. He said, if you're not happy with the outcomes of the Supreme Court, you're welcome to try to figure it out to your state level and amend your constitutions if you need to. That's a quote from Justice Gorsuch. But what we started to see is some of the reasons why these systems are producing disparate outcomes is not because it's racist, that policies are being created in a way that are, where they say, let's just make sure that, the disabilities communities always receive less than, sufficient outcomes. But I think if you take a bunch of factors and connect them together, that create various characteristics of what that community represents. I'll just give you some examples. They're on the school lunch program. They live in this neighborhood. They're in this area code. They are a zip code rather. They're on they're on SNAP. And at some point or another, and I think what we've seen this. It's not new. It started happening in the '60s with the Nixon administration. We know it's that there's record that exists that really spells out the construction of the Southern strategy and how they went from using the N-word to just putting together various attributes, multiple attributes that collectively together with pinpoint precision and laser beam focus would literally identify a certain demographic of people. That's an algorithm.
Okay, I honestly don't fully understand what you just said at all. And I'm trying to understand when you say outcomes, because you've used the word outcomes probably no less than 36 times. Is that wealth accumulation? Is it college admissions? Because when you look at college admissions, a white man, just based on data, is less likely to get into Harvard than other populations. So I'm like, what are the outcomes that you're advocating for?
I'm not going to entertain that. Do you have any other questions?
Okay. Well, and so whether you entertain it or not, that goes to prove my point that algorithmic harm might sound like a very buzzy catchword, but it actually doesn't mean anything. And the other thing that I would just say is pursuant to House rules, excuse me, Mark, I'm not done. Pursuant to House rules, you actually cannot prescribe motive to members of the House of Representatives. And when you were saying, I mean, you're creating a sense of urgency, you're declaring complicity for members that don't support Prop 4. So what exactly are you accusing us of if we don't support this, which I do not? What am I complicit in? Because you're prescribing motive, and that is against House rules. So that's a pure violation.
You're properly characterizing my testimony.
Well, the beauty of it is that it's all recorded, Mark, and we can watch it back. Because you've said this multiple times, and I'm surprised that the chair is allowing this to go on because
I am surprised I'm allowing you to go on.
You've prescribed complicity and urgency and a lack of moral clarity. So what exactly are we being accused of?
I think that somebody has a First Amendment right to be testifying.
And so do I. And we're the representatives.
You're talking about rules on the floor.
It's unbelievable.
You're talking about rules of
attacked by a member. I don't mind attacked by a member of your committee.
Listen, I'll be lectured. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by you, and we will all be judged someday. But I'm going to be judged by my God and not by you, Mark. I mean, it is unbelievable. The high horse.
Would it be possible for us to take a recess?
Yeah. Well, I think we're just about done.
Yeah, we're almost about done. I do appreciate the representative's line of question, and I do also respectfully apologize for any disruption in your committee, Mr. Chair. I am grateful that the testimony is recorded and that you will have the ability to go back to see it. I'm also grateful that Mr. Professor Teach Out does, he does also have the ability to speak for himself. So I would also invite you to invite him so he can use his own voice, because I believe he's also been mischaracterized.
Right, appreciate that, Mark. So that's the last witness we have today. I know we have a bit of time before the public hearing, which is at 5 o'clock in room 11. So we will see folks then. Can I just, all right, so we'll go off live. We're adjourned until